Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf kaf gimel. This is the daf for the first day of Sukkot. So we're going to get started with a quick review of the previous daf. What we saw was the Ziknei Daram, the elders of the south, had this opinion that basically they said that since Tumah hutra b'tzibur, Tumah mate, since Tumah mate is allowed when the majority of the people are impure, but it's not true for Tumah sheretz, for creepy crawler, touches somebody. That makes Tumah sheretz more severe because there's no heter at all. There's no way to permit it. Therefore, when the Mishnah talks about that a kohen who does the avoda when he's impure, he's going to be the avoda is disqualified, is only going to be talking about the sheretz case. To which Ula says, what are you talking about, right? It's absurd what you're saying, Ula says, because at the bottom of yesterday's daf, he said, what's stronger, the michaplim or the mitkaprim, right? The ones who provide the atonement or the ones who get the atonement. And he says the koach mitkaprim, showing the following: Ma bimkom shenitmeu ba'alim b'sheretz. If the people become impure for sheretz, they're allowed to mishachim korbanotayim. They can send their korban pesach with somebody else to do it for them. So a kohen who's mitame nitma b'sheretz, according to what you're saying, eino miratzeh. There's no way to resolve that issue. So if that's the case, in a case where nitmeu ba'alim b'meit, she'en mishachim korbanotayim, but if they're impure to the dead, where they can't send their korbanot because a person who's impure to a dead body has to do a pesach sheni, they can't send their pesach. So what do you see here? That obviously then the kohen shenitma b'meit einu din she'en miratzeh. In simple terms, what they're basically saying is, if by a regular person, since they can send a korban pesach if they're Tumah sheretz, but they can't if they're Tumah mate, therefore the kohen, if he's disqualified for Tumah sheretz, all the more so he's going to be disqualified. His work is going to be disqualified also if he's impure to a dead body, which in general fits with also what we would think in general, that Tumah mate is more severe. To which the Gemara says it must be, and this is something we're going to deal with a lot today, it must be the Ziknei Daram hold that someone who's Tamei Meit can bring a korban pesach, basically not themselves, because they can't, they're impure, but they can have someone do it on their behalf. This raises a slew of questions. Okay, we're going to have 5 difficulties on this right now. The first one being at the bottom of Kaf Ben and Bet. Doesn't it say a person who becomes impure and he does Pesach the second month, meaning you push off to Pesach Sheni? So if you don't need Pesach Sheni, if you can have someone take care of your korban on Pesach Rishon. So they answer l'mitzvah. It's just ideally you should push it off till Pesach Sheni and do it when you can actually eat the korban. But you don't have to, okay? Meaning, if you decided to have someone send your korban pesach, you fulfill your obligation. Okay, second difficulty. V'aktiv ish lefi ochlo. Doesn't it say that the korban pesach has to be slaughtered on behalf of people who can eat it? And the person who's impure for sure can't eat the sacrificial meat. Even if he has someone bring the korban for him or her, they still can't eat the sacrificial meat. They're impure. So the answer again, the mitzvah. Ish lefi ochlo means it's supposed to be slaughtered, right, to chosu, which means it's supposed to be slaughtered for people who can eat it, actually. That's the ideal. But if it happens to be there's someone who can't eat it, it's okay. Now they're going to say, wait a minute. So the first 2 answers were, from the first 2 difficulties, we came to the conclusion that it's just the mitzvah, meaning, ideally, you should push it off to Pesach Sheni. Ideally, it should only be people who can eat it, but if you did it anyway, it's okay. Uli kuve lo, wait a minute. This issue of ish lefi ochlo, that it has to be done for the people who can eat it, is only ideally, but it works anyway. Wait a minute. We see in a different source, Vahatanya, it says in a baraita, that it actually completely disqualifies it. How do we know? The Pasuk reads there, okay, I'll read the whole Pasuk. Right, so if they don't have their own animal, like their own lamb or sheep, what do? They take hu shcheno karova bito, you and your neighbor get together. So you do it according to the number of people, and we kind of have the number of people, right? Notice there's a little repetition. And then it says ish lefi ochlo. It's kind of the same idea, so we're going to see that right now. There's going to be 3 stages to this baraita. The first thing is, according to the number of people, meaning you have to have registered to be part of this korban pesach before it's slaughtered. They have to know exactly how many people are planning to eat. Shachatosha lo leminu yav, yachol yehei over ala mitzvah. You might have thought if it's slaughtered not for the intent of the people registered, but for someone else, then maybe that would be a problem. Talmud lomar tachosu. Right? Maybe, in other words, yachol yehei over ala mitzvah, maybe you just didn't fulfill a positive obligation, but it's still going to be okay. Talmud lomar tachosu, because it says tachosu, and it also said b'michsat nefashot. Hakatuv shana alav la'akev. We've seen this many times, right? In Zevachim, in the world of kodshim, if something is repeated, it means it's essential. So what do we see here? It has to be done l'minuyav. Now that's minuyav, not lochlav. Lochlav is people who can actually eat it. Could say the person who's impure could still have been registered. But now we make one more jump, because it says ish lafi ochlo tachosu. Whoever eats, right? Then for them it's slaughtered. Eat kash ochlin l'minuyim. Then they say, then we make a parallel between the ones who can eat and the ones who are registered, which means whatever is true for the registered, which means it's ma'akev, it's essential. Without it, it's no good, it's disqualified. Likewise, for the people who eat, it's disqualified. So there you have it. It's essential that the people be able to eat it. So how could we possibly suggest that in order, again, this was all the difficulty we had yesterday that we reviewed today, which is if the people can't bring the sacrifice, if the people can't eat the sacrifice like the impure person, how could the Ziknei Darom possibly say that, right? If right now we're saying, sorry, I'm just I said it a little confused order. If what we're saying now is that it can't possibly be that you can't possibly sacrifice it if the people can't eat, then you can't sacrifice for someone who's impure, then how did we respond to the difficulty against the Ziknei Darom and say the only way to explain their theory is they must think, right, in other words, Ula's comparison there, they must think that the Korban Pesach could actually be brought, okay? If the Korban Pesach could be brought for someone who's impure, well, we just saw that it can't be. So, simple answer, Ziknei Darom lo makshe, they don't have the hekesh. You have to be registered, but you don't necessarily have to eat it. So they just skipped the last part of that baraita. Okay, further question, number 4. V'chilo makshe nami, even if you don't have this hekesh, okay, meaning even if you don't have it, it should be a little different, the words here. I'm going by the Bach. Mia itlu pircha. Still, there's a problem. What's that? Uma bimkom shenitmu ba'alim b'sheret shemeshachim korbanotayim lechatchila. Now, still we can make this comparison. Even if you say, we go with sherets, right, you can bring the korban, and Pesach, you can bring the korban. And that was the whole, right, that's why basically they respond to Ula. Don't worry, because it's all one and the same, right? And therefore you could say, Pesach anyway, you could be sholchim korbanotehen. So you can't make that whole thing, well, if the sheret they could bring and the Pesach you can't bring, then obviously the Pesach is going to be disqualified. But if you put them in the same boat, they both can be brought, then you can't make that comparison, right? To say, oh, well, obviously that law is much more severe. It's not, it's the same. But it's still going to be a more severe law the way we understand it now, because we kept asking these questions and we kept saying, yeah, you can bring Pesach Rishon, right? It's just not ideal. You shouldn't do it, but if you do it, it's okay. So now compare it to sherets. Okay? If you become Tamei Sherets, you can have someone take care of your Korban Pesach for you. Why is that? Well, first of all, you go to the mikveh in the morning and you can tovel, right? You can tovel in the mikveh. You can wait till nightfall and you'll be able to eat the Pesach at night. So that lechatchila can be done. But kohen shenitma b'sheret, and then, even though that's got a light halacha, lenient, yet kohen shenitma b'sheret eino meratze. But a kohen who becomes impure with the sheret can't, right? The work is disqualified. And that was the whole thing that Ziknei Darom said. Just sheret is disqualified, not mate. But now, what's the problem? Makom shenitmu ba'alim b'meit she'en meshachim korbonoteim lechatchila. Ideally, if you got impure to the dead and you're not going to be pure by nighttime, ideally you're not supposed to bring the Korban Pesach. You're not supposed to send people. Now, it's true if you do it, it works, but that still makes it more severe, more difficult than the previous, than the sherets. So therefore, wouldn't you then say, Kohen shenitma b'meit eino din she'eino meratze? So wouldn't you go back and say again, Ziknei Darom, that the Kohen who becomes impure to the dead cannot be meratze? That korban is completely disqualified. And that actually has no answer. And now we're going to have a further, number 5 difficulty, meitive. This is from a Mishnah in Pesachim. Mipnei she'amru nazir v'oseh pesach, hatzitz miratzeh al tumat dam, ve'ein hatzitz miratzeh al tumat haguf. You have a nazir. Now, what's the issue with a nazir and oseh pesach? What's similar about them both? They both can't eat the pesach. The one who's impure for pesach can't eat the meat, which is part of the mitzvah, right? You bring the sacrifice, you have to eat it, which doesn't apply for all other korbanot. Even the ones that you can eat, you don't have to eat it. And the nazir has a whole process it talks about in the Torah. If you become impure to a dead body, what happens? Well, you have to wait until you finish the days of impurity. You become pure again. Then you bring your sacrifices, and then you have to start your nazirut all over. So it's clear the nazir can't bring his sacrifices from the Torah until after the nazir is pure. So now they say, you have a nazir and oseh pesach. Hatzitz miratzeh al tumat dam, ve'ein hatzitz miratzeh al tumat haguf. So the tzitz, if the kohen gadol is wearing the tzitz, it atones for impurity of blood. Let's say the blood. Okay, now, what I said about the Nazir and oseh pesach isn't so relevant just yet. But if the blood was to become impure, so the tzitz will atone for that, but it's not going to atone for tumat haguf. Now, we assume, what kind of tumat haguf are we talking about? The Nazir and the oseh pesach. If they're impure, okay, because the pesach can't be brought, right? That goes against Signei Darom, because this is saying, there's no, right? If the tzitz can't atone for it, then the sacrifice is no good. And it can't atone for a nazir because the nazir is not supposed to bring their sacrifice if they're impure to the dead. So now the question is bimai. What are we talking about here? We're assuming we're talking about the owner of the sacrifice becoming impure. Now, ilema b'tumat sheretz. If you're saying this time about tumat sheretz and not tumat meit, we know that's not true because shochtim v'zorkin al tumat sheretz, because we already learned you can slaughter someone's sacrifice if they're tamei sheretz. So if the tzitz would be miratzah on that, it's fine. It takes care of that. Ela tumat meit must be tumat meit, and what does it say? And this is what I said before: Eina tzitz miratzeh. Almanit u'baleh b'meit ein meshachim korbanoteihem. Now, what's the point here? It's not just that maybe we'd say the kohen then who's like that will be disqualified. This is against the point we made at the very bottom of yesterday's stuff. The only way to understand, and this is what we've been asking all our questions about, the only way to understand Signei Darom is to assume that they hold that the korban pesach, if you're tamei meit, you can actually bring it. Not ideally, but b'diavad, right? It works. Now, if it works, that means the tzitz is miratzeh on tumat meit for the owners. And this says the tzitz isn't miratzeh on tuma of the guf, tuma of the body, which we assume means, right, you're tamei meit, and then you're trying to bring korban pesach. It doesn't work. So, according to Signei Darom, the way we explain Signei Darom based on all this difficulty, it would work. So, to which they answer, lo. If this Mishnah was really talking about when it said the tzitz is not miratzah on tumat guf, on someone who's impure, it's talking about the owner, then you'd be right, because the only way to explain it is tumat meit. But what's this really talking about, this Mishnah? Now we're going to take it out of its simple reading and say kigon shenitmach kohen b'sheretz. Tumat guf you thought was the owner because the subject was the nazir and the oseh pesach. But actually, when they switch this line of the tzitz miratzeh, ain't a tzitz miratzeh, the tzitz is not going to atone for the kohen. Okay? Nitma kohen b'sheretz. If a kohen is nitma by sheretz, the tzitz is a miratzeh, which means the korban is disqualified, which is exactly what Signei Darom said. And that would work perfectly. What's the problem? Well, we're going to say maybe the end of that Mishnah doesn't really fit in with saying it's sheretz. Why? Well, if you say the first part of the Mishnah sheretz, the second part must also be sheretz, and look what the second part says. If not, look at the end of that Mishnah. Nitma tumata tahom hatzitz miratzeh. Now, even though the tzitz isn't miratzah on tumah of the body, it is miratzah on tumah of a person, right? Tumah of a person. It is miratzah on tumah of a person if it's tumat tahom. What's tumat tahom? It's, let's say we're talking about a dead body. It's where we find a dead body. Like, let's say someone brings their sacrifice, and then later they find out that they went into some area that no one even knew there was a dead body there, and somehow they all of a sudden just discovered there was a dead body buried there, okay? As opposed to, let's say, I walked through a cemetery and wasn't paying attention. I walked through a cemetery, or I forgot and I went to the temple and did a sacrifice without going through a purification process, right? That's tumah, okay? But tumah tahom, and that tzitz is not going to be miratzeh, right? It was an accident, but still it won't help. But if it's tumah tahom that no one even knew there was a tumah there, and then somehow later they figured out, and it turns out I was impure when I was in the temple, that's a different story. Now, that actually we're going to allow the tzitz to atone for that, because the person really couldn't have known that. Now, Hatani Rabbi Chia, now it says on that, and this is the important part, is we wanted to say the first part of the Mishnah was talking about Tumat Aguf, the tzitzis and maratza of a sheretz, and then you'd have to say the second part is also about a sheretz, but if it's Tumat Tahom of a sheretz, it would work. Well, now we're going to see maybe there is no such thing as Tumat, like this Tumat Tahom of a sheretz is not a relevant thing. Lo amru Tumat Tahom, and as when they say, okay, so Rabbi Chia, Hatani Rabbi Chia had a baraita that said, Lo amru Tumat Tahom ela lemeit bilvad. When they talked about this leniency of Tumat Tahom, they only said it about a mate, not about anything else. Right? In other words, a mate was an easy case. So a sheretz would be no one knew a sheretz was there, something like that. But this heter for Tumat Tahom is not by sheretz. So you can't say the Mishnah is talking about that, right? So it says it's only lemeit, right? So what does it mean? Lemeit, lemiute, my. What's that coming to exclude? My lav, lemiute, Tumat Tahom de sheretz, right? We assume it's lemeit bilvad, it's only for a mate, not for a sheretz. To which the Gemara says, no. If we're looking at this with the eyes of Ziknei Darom, and we have to say the first part was sheretz, we can say the second part is sheretz too. What do we do with the words just made? Well, lo lemiute Tumat Tahom de ziva. It's talking about to exclude the Tumat Tahom of someone who's a zav or a zava. That's a different thing. That's a case where we're not going to have Tumat Tahom apply because it comes from the body of a person. So if it came from out of nowhere, we're still going to say that's a problem because that comes from the person's body rather than something external. That's at least one of the explanations given. And we're going to be more strict about zav, but mate and sheretz we could be more lenient about, and then we could read the Mishnah like we explained for the Ziknei Darom. But we're going to have a further question. Elaha debai Rami bar Hama. But wait, Rami bar Hama asked the following question and didn't have an answer. Now, if we read the Mishnah in this way, we have a very clear answer because again, in order to explain the Mishnah according to the Ziknei Darom, the Mishnah in Pesachim, we had to say, one, it was talking about a kohen, not the person, the nazir or the oseh Pesach. Number two, it was talking about Tumat sheretz. So now we're going to say, wait a minute. And then the Tumat Tahom of a kohen who was tamei, Tumat sheretz of Tumat Tahom, we're going to say is permitted. Now, right, the tzitz is meratzeh. But what did Rami bar Hama ask? Kohen ha-meratzeh bekorbonotehem, hu tralo Tumat Tahom, or lo tralo Tumat Tahom. Now, if a kohen is bringing someone's korbanot, and all of a sudden finds out, and here it doesn't matter sheretz or tumat mate, that they became impure somehow with some sort of tumat tahom. Right? Tahom means the depths. That's why we use this as there was no way you could have ever known. It was in the depths. Hutralo tumat tahom, right? Or is it not? Is it hutralo tumat tahom or lo hutralo tumat tahom? Is it permitted? Is it not permitted? He asked that question. Now, if our Mishnah is talking about a kohen, then it says clearly for tumat tahom it is meratzeh. It is accepted. So, tifsho to Tumat Tahom utralo. If we read the Mishnah the way we read it with the Ziknei Darom glasses on, then we'd have an answer. So we must obviously not read it that way. Otherwise, Rami bar Hama wouldn't have asked that question. To which the Gemara answers, that's not a problem. Right? I need to read a little bit more before we get to the answer. Dahahacha bekohen kaimina, because we just established it. It's talking about the kohen. Well, de Rami bar Hama vadai pligi. According to Rami bar Hama, they have an argument. In other words, Rami bar Hama disagrees with Ziknei Darom. Okay, we're going to say Rami bar Hama for sure disagrees with the Ziknei Darom, and therefore he doesn't have to read the Mishnah that way, and therefore he has the question. He reads the Mishnah in the simple reading. It's talking about the owner. It's talking about an owner who became impure with tumat mate. Okay, so we now have these two approaches. We have Rami bar Hama's approach, who thinks that now that would lead us to say, or let's start with Ziknei Darom. According to Ziknei Darom, kohen who does work with the sheretz, right, who becomes impure, with the sheretz and does work in the temple, disqualified completely. Sacrifice is disqualified, but not for tumat mate. Second, a person who brings, because it's not for tumat mate, a person who sends their korban pesach with a messenger to take care of it for them, it's actually valid. Not ideal, but it works. Comes Rami bar Hama and doesn't understand things that way, and therefore thinks that even, right, avoda, that's tumat mate, is also disqualified. If a kohen's tamei mate and works in the temple, it will be disqualified. And a person cannot send their korban pesach, right, before they can send a korban pesach if they're impure. Push it off to Pesach Sheni, right? Pesach Sheni isn't just you can opt in and decide to wait, or you can bring it now. No, Pesach Sheni is the way to go. So now we're going to have a difficulty on Rami bar Hama, and then we're going to bring a different version of this difficulty of this source that was brought, not as difficulty of Rami bar Hama, but actually as a difficulty on the Ziknei Darom. So Tashma, let's learn from here. V'nasa Aaron et avon hakodashim. This is the pasuk about the tzitz. Basically, Aharon, the Kohen Gadol, takes care of the sin related to the kohen, to the sacrificial items, or something having to do with the temple, with holy things. V'chi eze hu avon nosei. What iniquity does this take care of? Turning out to Amud Bet. Im avon pigul harek. Now we know it's tuma, but right now they're suggesting if it's pigul, maybe it's taking care of pigul. Maybe it takes care of that. No, harek far ne'emal, in a famous pasuk, which is really about notar, but the rabbis explained it to be pigul, right? It's talking about both notar and pigul, and we're going to see that right now. Harek far ne'emar lo yechashev. It already says this will not count. No tzitz is going to help you with that. Im avon notar harek far ne'emar lo yiratzeh. If it's notar, well, it says in the pasuk, this will not be accepted. Okay, I'll read the pasuk again. If you eat from it the third day when you're not allowed to eat it, lo yeratzeh will not be accepted. That's notar. Hamakrivoto lo yechashev. That's another verb. Another thing won't be accepted. They say that's pigul. Will not count. So both of those, the tzitz definitely doesn't atone for. What's left? No say ela avon tumah. Right? It takes care of tumah iniquity. Why tumah? Specifically, why is that more lenient? Shehu tra michala b'tzibur, because there's a whole heter for tumah. Tumah is hutra b'tzibur. It's permitted in public. So, right, when the majority of the people are tameh. So, since there's already an opening for that, we'll say that tzitz atones for that. Now, my tumah, what tumah are we talking about? Does the tzitz atone for? Ile mami tumat sheretz hechi ishtere. Can't be tumat sheretz because there is no heter for sheretz, right? It's not like if the majority of the people became impure with sheretz, we're going to permit it. No. Ela tumat made. It must be tumat made. And what does it basically say here? The tzitz is maratzeh for tumat made. That means if someone's tamei made, right, they're not going to disqualify the avoda because the tzitz atones for that. That's exactly what the Ziknei Darom say, and it's exactly against what Rami bar Hama said. So the answer, what's the answer? So ela tumat made, right? V'lav kigon shenitmu ba'alim b'meit, right? This is still the question, and is it not a case where the owners became impure of the dead, and then what does it say? Right? They're allowed to bring the korban pesach. Alma nitmu ba'alim b'meit meshachim korbonotehem. It seems to say that they can send their korbanot. Now, this is all still part of the difficulty against Rami bar Hama. Ubemai. Now, what is this talking about? In what case? We're now going to prove it's obviously Pesach. What are the two possibilities? Well, Ibn Nazir v'chiyamut meit alav amar Rachmana. Can't be the Nazir because it says in the Torah you can't bring it while you're impure. You have to wait till you finish your purification process. Ela la'osa Pesach. It must be the osa Pesach. And then that's our whole long proof that there's a difficulty against Rami bar Hama because Rami bar Hama thinks that they can't bring their korban Pesach. And this is basically saying, Tumah, since it's permitted b'tzibur, the tzitz is maratzah. When is it permitted b'tzibur? In a maid case, tumat maid, impurity of the dead. And you're allowed to bring it to the temple. It's saying, when can you bring it? It must be the Pesach, right? Someone who's tameh on Pesach can send someone to do their korban for them, and the tzitz will atone for that. Well, how do we answer this question? Very simply, lo olam b'sheretz v'shem tumah ba'olam. Now we're talking about a sheretz. When it says it's nosei avon tumah, it's talking about tumat sheretz, right? Which means the problematic one is the tumat meit. And tumat meit, you cannot bring your korban pesach. Okay, no way, no how. So how do we explain the tumah hutra b'tzibur, where it says, well, it's avon tumah because that is permitted and the sheretz is never permitted? No, they say tumah as opposed to pigul and notar. Shame tumah. The concept of tumah, there is a case, not our case of sheretz, but there is a case where tumah is permitted if the majority of the people are impure, and that's impurity of the dead. On account of that, we're going to choose of our three, pigul, notar, and tumah, we're going to say tumah is the one that the tzitz atones for, not pigul and notar, because those have no permitted way ever, but the tumah has some way that there is a case of tumah where someone could be permitted, and that's tumat meit. But the case where the tzitzis maratz happens not to be tumat meit, it's a different tumah, which is tumat sheretz. Now we're going to bring the same source, or part of the same source, but we're going to say that this is actually coming as a difficulty on the Ziknei Darom. How so? Well, the source reads like this. Avon HaKodashim in, Avon makdishim lo. In other words, they're taking that source that said Nasaron et Avon kodeshim, and then it says Ez Avon Noseh and all that, and the whole thing, right, is the same thing. There's Avon Tum'ah Shu Torah B'tzibur. But basically, this source is going to say it's Noseh Avon kodeshim, sacrificial items, but not Avon makdishim. People who are impure, it's not going to atone for them at all. Now you can see why this is going to raise difficulty, because my Tumah, Ilema Tumat Sheretz, if you're going to say it's Tumat Sheretz, and it does in the Tzitzis and Maratza, and that would fit with Ziknei Tarom, because they said, right, the Tzitzis and Maratza on Avon of Sheretz, but it is on Tamei Meit. So, Miyashtarya B'tzibur, you can't, again, like we said the first time, you can't say it's talking about Tumat Sheretz, because it says it's Tumah specifically because that is what's permitted in the Tzibur, and Tumat Sheretz is not permitted in the Tzibur. Elalav Tumat Made, and again, Avon Kodeshim in Avon Makdishim Lo. What do you see? The tzitz is not meratzeh for Avon of someone who is impure to the dead, right? So if someone's impure to the dead, they can't bring a sacrifice, right? Not for the owner, meaning they can't send their Korban Pesach with others, and not the kohen. It'll be completely disqualified. That's Rami Bar Hama. That's totally against Ziknei Daron. To which, again, they're going to answer the question in the same way, according to this version. In other words, again, this isn't two questions. It's one version of the difficulty that it was on Rami Bar Hama, and the second version that it was a difficulty on the Ziknei Daron. So the answer is the same, which is, La'olam Tumat Sheretz. It really is talking about Sheretz, which fits perfectly with Ziknei Daron. Vishem Tumah Ba'olam. When it says it's Tumah, because Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur, since Tumah in general has a case where it's Hutra B'tzibur, in a case of Tumat Meit, that is why this is referring to, Tumah, the tzitz will be Maratza on Tumah of Tumat Sheretz. Okay? And then, but again, only for the sacrificial items, not for people. And there you have it, that it won't be Maratza on people who become impure, either the owner or the kohen. And again, that means kohen's avoda is completely disqualified if they have Tumat Sheretz, but not Tumat Meit. Okay, so we resolve both difficulties in both versions in the same way. Now we get to the easy part of today's daf, which is going back to the Mishnah where it said another disqualification of a sacrifice is Yoshev. The kohen is sitting. Minalam. Where do we get this from? Amarav Nachman, Amar Kra. The pasuk says La'amod l'sharei. You have to stand to serve. So there you have it. Well, not so simple, right? La'midah b'charti v'lo liyeshiva, right? You were chosen to stand, not to sit. Now the Gemara says, let's bring a baraita. And in this baraita, it says something a little different. La'amod l'shareit mitzvah kishuhu omeo ha'omdim shina alav ha'katuv la'akev. So it says it twice. Again, we get back to the same thing. Shana alav ha'katuv, when it says it twice, that means it's essential. Without it, disqualified. So it says la'amod l'shareit, the kohanim are supposed to stand to serve. It's in Dvarim Yucheh Pasuk Hey. And in Dvarim Yucheh Pasuk Zayin, it says, V'sherei b'shem Hashem Elokav, Kichol echav ha'leviim ha'omdim sham, like all his other brothers, the Levites, who are standing there, Lifnei Hashem, before God. So there you have standing mentioned in two different Pasukim. That means it has to be standing only. Okay? That's la'akev. It's essential. So we have one that proves it from one pasuk, and the second, the baraita, right? Rava, in the name of Rav Nachman, proves it from one pasuk. The baraita brings that pasuk and another one to show it's essential. Amalei Rava le Rav Nachman. Now we have a question. Michti yoshev kizal dami. If you sit in the temple, you're a kohen who sits in the temple. It's like you're a zar. It's as if someone who's not supposed to be doing the avoda came in and did the avoda. Umachil avoda, and that disqualifies the avoda just like a zar. Well then, ema mazar b'mita, af yoshev b'mita. Well, then it should be that just like a zar who goes and works in the temple gets the death penalty, right? Gets death by the hands of God. Also, this person should get death also if you're yoshev, because it's basically treated one and the same. To which the Gemara, but then he asks, Alama Tanya, why does it say in a baraita? Aval arel, okay, it says in a baraita that, but if there's a kohen who's in arel, who's not circumcised, onein, he's in that time period before the body's buried, yoshev, einam b'mita ela ba'azhara. It's just a negative prohibition, but they don't get the death penalty. Now, if it's all the same, they should get the death penalty, right? Because they're basically like a kohen. It's like someone who's not a kohen doing the avoda. To which the Gemara answers a typical answer, which is Mishum dahavim b'chusar b'gadim v'shalo v'chu tedayim v'raglayim shnei ktuvim b'im ke'echad v'chol shnei ktuvim b'im ke'echad ein melamdim. So we have this principle. If something's written once in the Torah, we can say it builds paradigm for everywhere else. But if something's written 2 times in 2 different places, then we say only there, nowhere else. So what do we have? We have Mechusar Begadim, a kohen who doesn't wear the priestly garments. There's a pasuk that says they get death. And there's a pasuk by, here I'll quote you the pasuk, right? I have the pasuk here for the Yirachatzu Mayim V'lo Yamutu. You should wash your hands and you won't die. There you see that you die if you don't do it right. And on Yud Zayin Amud we have the pasuk about the zar. Okay, I don't remember where the pasuk is about the Mechusar Begadim, but right, where is it? Right, that's on Yud Zayin. Okay, right, where we say he's like a zar, and the law is like the zar. So you can go back and look at Yud Zayin Amud. Anyway, the point being that these are 2 psukim where they say the person dies, and it doesn't say it anywhere else. From there you learn, right? And it doesn't say it only once; it says it twice. Once it says it twice, actually, it's not that it doesn't say it anywhere else. We'll talk about that soon. But twice, it means once it's written more than one place, you can't learn from there to anywhere else. Now, there is an opinion that says twice you can learn, 3 times you can't. We're going to get to that tomorrow, where it says, what about the one who says twice, but, twice you can learn, and then we're going to see there's a 3rd pasuk. That's why what I said before isn't right, that there are no others. It's more that there's more than one. Okay? And that's why we don't learn that they get the death penalty, even though it's similar to a zar, but it's not completely similar and they don't get the death penalty. So, what did we do today? We had this back and forth with the Zignei Darom. We had a slew of questions against the Zignei Darom, and really against the conclusion we came to that they must hold that someone could actually send their Korban Pesach even while they're impure, even though ideally they shouldn't, they still could. We asked a slew of questions on that. Some of them we answered, but some of them we were really left without an answer. And then we had Rami bar Hama, who we saw disagree with the Zignei Darom, because first we brought it as, well, based on the way they read that Mishnah, can't we have an answer to Rami bar Hama's question? To which we said, well, Rami bar Hama just didn't accept that reading because they didn't accept the Zignei Darom's opinion. And then we had a difficulty on Rami bar Hama. A second version of that, which is the same source, raised a difficulty on Zignei Darom, resolved both those problems. And then we moved to the Yoshev. We had 2 sources. How you know a person who's sitting in the temple when they do the avoda is disqualified. And then we moved to if they're really like a zar, then why don't they get the death penalty? And that's because of the Shnei Ketuvim. And we'll finish that up tomorrow when we say, what about the one who says Shnei Ketuvim does still teach? And then we're going to have 3. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Chag Sameach. This is the daf for Sukkot, and Moadim L'Simcha.